Good morning, distinguished guest and esteemed participant. Welcoming you all to this insightful fireside chat where we are gathered today to explore and discuss the pivotal role of Asia, particularly India, in the global energy transition journey. As we navigate the complexity of a rapidly changing world, it is evident that the new energy trends are emerging, reshaping the market, and propelling us towards a cleaner and a more sustainable future. In view of this, we aim to shed light on the key factor impacting these markets, different models of financing, and we will also delve into the symbiotic collaboration between the public and private sectors in the journey towards decarbonization. With this being said, allow me to invite the panelists we have with us today who will be sharing their views and insights on this set topic. Please welcome Mr. Sambitosh Mohapatra, partner and leader ESG platform, Energy Utilities and Resources from PwC, and Ms. Shilpa Gupta, General Manager, India Engineering from GE Gas Power. Thank you both of you for joining us with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. For this, without now any further delay, I would like to request Mr. Sambitosh to take this discussion ahead. Over to you, Mr. Mohapatra.
Thank you, Priyanka, for this. And isn't it timely? Over the last 2 years, we have seen significant momentum in terms of how India is shaping its policies, its regulatory frameworks to respond to this. I would say not challenges only, but also opportunities, right? We see significant opportunities around climate, around resource utilization, and it is enabled by the kind of demographics changes that we are seeing and the technology which is enabling it, right? So, and some of the things I would just want to lay out before we enter into this discussion is that India undertook a massive ambition, NDCs for 2030. Very clearly, we are saying that 50% of our energy sources should be from renewable sources. We're also talking about reducing the carbon intensity of our GDP by 45% over the 2005. And we believe that this is very ambitious, but there is a lot of confidence that India is on the right track, right? Because over the last 6 to 7 years, we have seen whatever commitments we have made on these issues, we have not only achieved that, but I would say exceeded that. That gives us the confidence that we're on the right track. The second aspect I would say is in this journey, there are 3 angles that we want to discuss. First is about the mindset, right? The mindset is that whether we are all ready to embark on this journey, being aware, being ready, and then we put resources behind it is the one. Second is the issue of, I would say, technology, whether technology is there which enables us to do it. And the third most important thing is whether financing is there, because do understand India is a developing nation. So what are the innovations which are happening around financing, right? So these are the 3 issues that we would want to discuss. Without further ado, I would want to bring in Shilpa into the discussion. And the first question that I would pose to her, I just laid out what she sees in India. But is there something that is also happening around Asia, right? And it is, of course, everybody understands that the 3 big economies, let's say the US, China, and India, have to transition if world has to become a better place to live in. So what are the kind of trends, Shilpa, that you typically see on the energy side of it, right? So if you can throw certain light on that.
Sure. So Sambitosh, let's start off by looking at some global trends first, and then we look at Asia and how India is going. So according to International Energy Agency, what we call the IEA today, so the total electricity demand is going to go up by nearly 50% through 2040. And about 770 million people still lack access to reliable electricity. So now increasing demand to get more people reliable electricity, having a powerful or stable grid and energy security, we will need a mix of electricity generation sources. So even though I think wind contributes, wind and solar are increasing and expected to grow. So wind is expected to grow at about 3x. Solar is expected to grow by 6x. But in spite of that, their combined generation contribution by 2040 is expected to be around 28%. And all the other renewables put together will be about 47%. Now let's look at Asia. Asia, the demand is expected to grow by 33%, in 2029 when compared to what we had in 2019. So within 10 years, we've seen the demand for electricity go up 33%. So Asia is going to play a major role in the energy transition journey, just given, I think, its size, the population that we have, the growing middle class that we have, industrialization, and also, I think, favorable conditions that allow for ample opportunities to develop renewable sources of power like solar and wind. For example, India has like almost 300 days where you could actually tap into energy. Now, for India, if you look at it, I think there are different countries that are there in a transition journey, and each one is at a different stage and has its own unique challenges. China, as an example, has the highest installed capacity of renewables and in the world, and then its power grid also remains dependent on fossil fuel for stability. On the other hand, in 2021, 44% of all their new power capacity actually came from fossil fuels. But they are realizing slowly that they need to move towards renewables. And I think geothermal power is now supplying a small portion of the country's total generation.
Sure.
Singapore, I think, is a little ahead from the ASEAN countries. They're going to introduce a carbon pricing scheme, which was implemented in 2019. And they're planning to increase their carbon tax by 5x, which is going to meet its zero emission targets by 2020. So I think if you look at it, I suggest that total energy investment in the ASEAN countries would reach up to 190 million US dollars a year by 2030. Now, when compared to this, today we spend about 70 billion US dollars a year between 2016 and 2020. So I think that's the trend that we are seeing globally and in India. So that was about Asia. Now coming to India. So India is actually in a growing phase right now, and we've set ambitious targets to raise our non-fossil-based fuel energy capacity to 500 gigawatts by 2030, while achieving our net zero carbon goals that we've set for ourselves by 2070. Now, in the recent years, I think along with a growing focus on amplifying clean energy sources, there is also a growing trend to tap into the newer fuels that are emerging, like hydrogen. And I think our national hydrogen policy that we have recognizes these emerging trends. Now, so the trends that we are seeing, Sambitosh, are the changing energy mix, development of carbon markets, compliance with ESG norms, green financing, adoption of digital technologies for grid stability, growing electrification. So I think all these are going to lead to a 24/7 electricity demand to support the economic growth that the world needs. And some of these trends actually will define the development of future energy markets. So to conclude, I think while these trends exist, and I think will require the necessary support, have the right policies in place and the right market demand created. So that's our net zero goals, and this is going to be growth and welcome. So I think the journey to net zero cannot be accomplished simply by tapping into new sources of power. Wake up to the reality of creating a critical demand and the infrastructure that needs to go with it, accommodate types of fuel. Like hydrogen, for example, right? It's the system that needs to develop. So I think the transition journey, so gas takes power as an example, and I come from the gas power segment. So I think this is also going to play an important role in providing the base load that's needed to balance those periods of intermittency that you will see in the renewable energy generation at a grid level. And the gas turbines that we have, like the G9HAO2, we have the capacity even today to blend hydrogen along with natural gas as fuel. So I think adopting these progressive technologies, I think, will be important as we our goals of net zero.
Sure. So Shilpa, I think you rightly alluded to a couple of things I pick up from your comment. One is that not only the policy and the regulatory side of it should be robust, but what you also mentioned is, can we capture the demand and the type of demand, right? The demand intermittency, that's one. And second is also the infrastructure, right? And to respond to both of them, you have appropriate technologies to align it, not only the non-fossil fuel, but you would require different types of technology and storage, pump storage. I think a lot of these are also getting debated. But I'm also very keen to understand, India about a year back also launched the lifestyle for environment, right? The globally, I think the typical standard is that look at energy efficiency, look at energy transition, and look at offsetting, right? The three blocks. But I think our Prime Minister also made a very clear statement which said that it's not only about demand, but can we look at before demand the whole consumption? So what he said that the earth can meet the needs of citizens, but it cannot meet the greed of citizens. So can we look at the consumption side of it first, right? So can we actually look at more meaningful and deliberate consumption? So that's the first building block, the lifestyle for environment, what we call it, life, right? And therefore, I was very keen as I was coming to this interaction that on the public side, we have seen significant movement, be it this life for environment, lifestyle for environment. Second is that about 2 years back, our market regulator came with a very clear reporting and disclosing norms for the top 1,000 companies, right, which we call it as BRSR, where the top 1,000 companies in terms of market cap have to, last year it was voluntarily, but this year they will mandatorily report on their ESG parameters. Now, when they are doing this BRSR, the top 1,000 companies for the first time, come this May, June, July, will put out their performance on ESG, right? And when they're doing it, most of them will have to put targets on the material elements for each one of them. And significantly, E becomes the important part. And E, of course, is all about carbon, energy, resource utilization, I think that angle. Now, government has done what it could. Now, regulator has also come and told the corporates that, hey, start moving your needle on the ESG side of it. So therefore, now the response is awaited from the corporates, right, to respond to this. And we also see the consumers, right, or investors are also pushing the corporates to be more responsible, be more sustainable. So in this ecosystem, how do you see the whole public side of it and private side of it coming together to respond to these market trends, right? So what are your customers talking about?
Yeah. So I think, right, you mentioned, Santosh, I think anytime you have a technology development that's new, I think it becomes very important that you have the right public-private partnerships. And in the past, I mean, these have been successful, not just in our industry, right? These have been really successful. So when we think of decarbonization as an example, I think there are broad areas that need to work together for it to be successful. And of course, the technology development that you also touched on. I think the second is the resources or the funding that's needed to develop technologies over years. And I think the third is the right policies in place so that all three put together will actually work towards net zero targets, etc. But to blend, potential, I think, to blend those finance and public-private partnerships, because combining resources and expertise is actually going to enable large-scale investments. It's going to accelerate project implementation and drive sustainable development. And I was mentioning earlier, I think PP model is pretty well established and it's been effective influencing market forces. And there are a couple of examples, I think, of PPP even in India in the energy transition space. For example, say Madhya Pradesh government's partnership with international corporations to develop a solar park. Or there's a First Movers Coalition in India, which actually is a flagship PPP that was launched by the US and the World Economic Forum to clean up most carbon intensive sectors. So PSUs are going to be, that are operating in the sectors are going to be encouraged to adopt decarbonization technologies, fostering innovation and investment. So in 1997, we had set up a joint venture with BHGL, which is called BGL. This to provide aftermarket services for gas turbine. And just last year in October, we signed an MOU with NTPC. It's the first of its kind MOU that we've signed to explore hydrogen firing with natural gas in GE. So as it's evident, I think these partnerships that we are talking about can influence market demands and are going to be very critical in the nation's journey to net zero. So I think across Asia, as you can see, I think like I highlighted, there are multiple partnerships that are going to play a pivotal role in marrying technology development with policy.
Sure. And Shilpa, so while you alluded to the partnerships, what we have also heard from corporates when we go there. Now, the development in India honestly has happened over the last decade and a half, right? So most of the investments in technologies that has happened has still not run its course, right? Because most of these technologies are 25 years old and, sorry, has to play out for 25 years. The bank loans are appropriately structured that way. Now, when the transition has to happen and we are trying to shift to a new technology, impairing the existing investments become very difficult in a developing nation with less of resources. So, one of the feedbacks which is also coming from corporates is that are technology companies willing to engage with us in a differential model, in a sense, a model where they don't take any money for the technology they deploy, but subsequently, when the outcomes are there, they take part and they take their revenue streams from those success stories or from the outcomes or from the differential. Now, is that something which, because otherwise the cost on end consumers becomes extremely difficult to be passed on, right? And we have seen that what has happened to the FGD discussions in the country. The FGD to thermal plants has not, it is only getting postponed, given that if you actually put those FGDs in place, you have to pass on close to 40 paisa to 60 paisa to the end consumer, and therefore it is getting rolled over. So, is there any way where we look at the price sensitivity and take the investment call, the OEMs take the investment but in the first 5 years and then over the next 5 years they make their money? Is there anything that you're seeing like that?
So I think, Sambitosh, if you ask me, anything that is technology development actually requires quite a bit of investment over the years,
Yeah.
right? And which is why we keep talking about these public-private partnerships or even the policy framework, as an example, that the government needs to put in place. So I'll give you some examples again, right? So government and organizations, I think across 30 countries have recognized that green hydrogen, as an example, is a strategy that we need to look at. So countries in Europe, Asia Pacific, America, even the Gulf Cooperation Council are adopting these strategies motivated by the Paris Agreement. Now, we do have a national green hydrogen policy that I alluded to earlier. So I think the announcement of India's green hydrogen policy also has been encouraging. And what is nice about it is that it has a panoramic view around not just manufacturing of hydrogen, but also transportation, storage, distribution, because this whole ecosystem needs to come in place. The government is looking at producing about 5 million tons of green hydrogen by 2030, which will require a lot of investments like we were talking about. Now, the second phase, I think, should be on how we want to address the pricing concerns, exactly to what you mentioned, Sambitosh, and creating the land and enabling domestic value. I think we all have to also look at how we eventually become a chosen export destination for green hydrogen. So I think despite all the benefits that green hydrogen brings, global investment has been a challenge, and that's what we were talking about too, right? So compared to the investments that are happening in the renewable energy sector, hydrogen actually remains a low investment sector today, and going mostly because of its high cost, particularly green hydrogen. However, I think it's forecasted that the cost of hydrogen will reduce dramatically between 2030 and 2050. So now, to support this widespread adoption of green hydrogen, there is a pressing need to scale the production of high performance electrolyzers, as an example. The Asia Pacific region is actually leading the way in hydrogen investments, accounting for 3% global investment in 2020. So I think there are countries, according to the hydrogen policy, uh, and they're looking at the combined hydrogen demand that's coming from China, India, Japan, South Korea, which is likely to reach 285 million tons in 2050, which accounts for almost 43% of demand. That, by the way, also looking at bringing its world-class 9F.05 gas turbine technology to Australia with the Tatwara B project as an example, which is from Energy Australia.
And I've also seen, we've been working with many of the state governments in India where they are putting up their own plans around green hydrogen. Most of the states today are putting and exactly doing that. So where do we get the demand from? How do we ensure the whole the supply chain is internalized? Where do we put this infrastructure? And can we not only meet India's demand for green hydrogen, but also ensure that we supply and become the hub for global? And therefore, you see most of the states which have large coastlines. Personally, I have been working with Odisha, which has a lot of steel and aluminium manufacturing there,
Mhm.
the, doing everything possible to ensure that it becomes the green hydrogen hub, given the I think the sea routes that
Yeah.
it can plan out for. It has three ports, so significant positive thing. But the only issue there is that everybody also understands, as you rightly said, because the investment into the R&D is not going so far. It is still more directed towards storage battery as of now, and slowly on the pump storage side. The hydrogen story, people believe, is a 2030 onward story, when I think some of these cost economics starts to make sense. But having said that, I completely understand that in the next 3 to 5, 4 years, you will see significant amount of state government, central government policies being very benign to ensure that India doesn't lose out what we lost out to some of our competitors as a nation when the solar boom happened, right? So they actually want the battery and the whole green hydrogen story to be internalized in terms of supply chains in India. So therefore, I completely echo your thoughts there. Now, the other thing is that we talked about the whole consumption story. We talked about how demand has to be aggregated. We talked about the infrastructure, and then we talked about the energy transition. Now, with all this, we will still have carbon, right? And if our ambition is to go for net zero, there has to be a huge element around offsetting. And you referred to this carbon capture and storage technologies, which is again another significantly, it can be a game changer if that technology becomes viable in terms of this cost economics and implementation. But it's also about the whole carbon markets. Now, carbon markets is not only about offsetting, but it is also about the internal carbon pricing, right? As soon as you start pricing for carbon in your processes, then the response of corporates to net zero is significantly different, because today we just don't understand the whole carbon in our processes as an organization. So, any thoughts around that? How do you see that evolving in
Sure.
India and in globally anywhere that you have experience with?
Yeah, so I think that you rightly mentioned, I think ESG regulations, I think definitely are calling on corporates to look beyond wealth maximization and consider sustainability as a pivot in managing their business and designing their strategies and goals. Now, this is not altruistic in nature. I think it's becoming more of a necessity, it's a necessary realization that corporates have to address sustainability. So I think carbon credits allow companies offset emissions, like you were mentioning, helping them meet regulatory and norms. So that is the compliance portion of the carbon credits, while funding sustainable carbon negative activities such as reforestation, as an example. So I think ESG compliance and voluntary carbon mapping, both I think will be closely intertwined, moving ahead. And as companies also will be committed to meet these targets by trading carbon emitters while also investing in sources of energy like hydrogen, like we were talking about, right? So I think this is encouraging because as carbon markets are progressing, I think an appropriate pricing mechanism in place. This is going to enable like holistic energy transition across. I think moving ahead and to conclude maybe on this topic, Sambitosh, I think priorities that we are having, the ESG, for example, will pick pace and we can actually anticipate greater policy making and regulations to be driven towards it. And I think this is very important even for the Indian industries who are actually warming up to the notion, I would say, of ESG at this point and for sustainability. So I think for business continuity, we must continue to invest in ESG because I think carbon markets will only ease our movement towards the end.
Sure. And Shilpa, we've also seen, I think India has ambitions to put out a carbon market in place by this July as we speak. So within a month, you will see the nascent carbon market platform being launched in India for sure. The second is the carbon market also, because India has its own NDC goals. So certain technologies, they will say that on that technologies you can't be doing the carbon trade outside. But what is important is that for about the emerging technologies, I think if the companies try to invest in that, on those technologies we have the ability to actually trade that globally, and therefore the price discovery can be significantly different. So as you rightly said, on a typical renewable project, you might not get the kind of carbon prices that you want. But if the same renewable projects along with storage, you will get a differential carbon pricing for that. So absolutely. So with that, I think we have come to the conclusion of the discussion on this. So thank you, Shilpa, and thank you, Economic Times. Hopefully, our audience will find it useful and will start their journey of being aware, of being conscious, and doing meaningful consumption, I would say. With that, signing off. Thank you, Shilpa. Glad to connect with you. And
Yeah.